Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today, Namibia's unique wildlife in the world's oldest desert. And we are here with Craig Glattar, who is actually broadcasting live from Cape Town. Craig grew up in South Africa, and his younger years were spent outdoors on a daily basis, catching frogs, snakes, and spending as much time as possible in the water. Family holidays were off-road affairs with trips through southern and eastern Africa in the family's trusty old 1978 Land Rover. And this naturally led to a career in tourism and travel. Craig's journey has come full circle, now applying his business acumen and love of conservation to full use with wilderness safaris and for us. So, Craig, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. What a wonderful opportunity to talk about one of the most astonishing countries in Africa at the moment, certainly a country that's on the tip of everybody's tongue. A tongue twister, no doubt. Namibia actually has its name after the Namib Desert, which is what we're going to start with and go into some detail. But the country is really celebrated for its vast open landscapes. It has an infinite supply of blue skies, sun-drenched weather, and just fantastic star-filled nights. And it's certainly a country that over the years has had a number of cultural influences from many different parts of the world. At any given time, Germany, Great Britain, even South Africa have all governed the territory, but it was with its eventual independence in 1990 that the country was able to develop and establish its own multicultural character and reinvent itself. And it's certainly a country that I describe as the land of contrast, where culture meets conservation. It's both a land of incredible wildlife and amazing beauty that mixes in interestingly well with all of the various cultural nuances in the country. It certainly blends that African style with the European influence on the architecture, the food, the customs, and even the art. But we're going to travel through the region, and we're going to start down in the south, where we're going to go through the red dunes of an area known as Sossusvlei. Then we're going to cut up along those lonely beaches up into the northern areas of Damaraland and Palembang to see the astonishing, incredible wildlife there, as well as ending off in the Etosha region. And this summarizes essentially one of Natural Habitat's great Namibian journeys. I am going to end with a little bit of detail on the Skeleton Coast, as well as an area in the far north on the border to Angola, so that we get a full idea of what this vast country can offer. And it really is a vast country. When we talk about the size of Namibia, I want you guys to consider that it is roughly twice the size of the state of California, but brace for it, it's only got about 2 million people. So Namibia is a land of absolute open space, and most of the wildlife occurring in Namibia is free roaming. That's a very, very important statement, because it's one of the few success stories in Africa where communities and conservation have combined, where people, rural people, can live side by side with the wildlife that moves freely in and out of these areas. And there's certainly a land that as you fly over it, it unfolds with spectacular beauty. The country is made up of two dominant desert biomes. The one, which is that light yellow biome you see on the left of the slide here on the Atlantic Ocean, and that is the Namib Desert, which is the oldest desert in the world, as you heard at the intro. It's about 200 million years old. Then you've got those other colors, that darker red and lighter orange, that comprise part of what's known as the Kalahari Basin, and that's a whole different type of desert biome with all manner of habitats in between. There's a couple of things that make Namibia different, and certainly a very interesting country. Very diverse biomes. You heard now about those desert biomes. The oldest desert in the world. I love this, the highest level of endemism. So endemism refers to animals that are indigenous or occur only in that given country or area. So Namibia as a country in Africa has the highest number of unique species that only occur inside that country, anywhere in Africa. That's an incredible statement for a country that's often misunderstood as a wildlife destination. Incredible diversity with a coastline that meets all of these sand dunes and these mountaintops. Amazing cultures. We talk about cultures like the Himba, the Herero, and the Rimfas markers, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on some of those. No malaria, which is a great plus. Clear, unpolluted skies. It's known as one of the best destinations in the world for stargazing. Over 20,000 private acres per guest in the wilderness safaris camps that you can see are listed here on this image from Namibia. And very unique, specialized wildlife, which is what really makes Namibia such an interesting destination. Now, when you travel through Namibia, half of the journey and part of the journey is the flying. With these beautiful contrasts and these open landscapes, the flying makes up a very important part of the experience. And wilderness safaris fly the natural habitat guests, not necessarily as the crow flies, but we fly low over the sand dunes, hugging the skeleton coast. So we build that flying into the journey. So even though the distances can be quite long when flying in light aircraft between camps, it's certainly one of the most spectacular flying that one will do anywhere in the world with this kind of scenery that unfolds before you. But we're going to head from the capital, which is called Windhoek, all the way down to start in the south, an area known as Sossusvlei, where we're going to have a look at a lodge known as Little Kilala, which is part of the Natural Habitat Program. And this is an incredibly interesting area that's built its reputation on the back of these amazing sand dunes and some of the colorful contrasts. Now, it's not all that long a flight. When I was saying the flights can be quite long, you're looking at just over an hour flight in a light aircraft from the capital city, Windhoek, down into Little Kilala. Now, Windhoek has some nice entry and exit points for international flights. Cape Town, Johannesburg in South Africa, direct flights even up to Frankfurt and other areas in Europe. So nice and easy access to get in and out of the country, and then you start your onward journey. So let's start down with Sossusvlei. So Sossusvlei, which is a real tongue twister to pronounce, and you're going to find a whole lot of that in Namibia. The Sossusvlei in itself is a large clay flay, which is another word for a pan, and it's situated at the end of what is known as an ephemeral river system. That is an underground river system that pushes up these beautiful sand dunes, and that river system is known as the Horeb River, and it pushes up these beautiful sand dunes, which creates this incredible environment. Now, this area is right smack bang in the middle of one of the largest game reserves in southern Africa. It's known as the Namib National Park. It's about 13 million acres in size. And it's an area quite devoid of rainfall and quite a lack of vegetation, as you can see. But what really makes it interesting is the incredible wildlife that's adapted to survive in this area. A lot of the wildlife in this area gets their hydration, their water source, from coastal fog that blankets the area and penetrates far inland from the Atlantic coastline and hugs the sand dunes and ends up in this area, also through a process known as detritus, which is where water collects in certain depressions in the early hours of the morning, and wildlife is able to access water in that manner. Now, the first thing that springs to mind is the sand dunes of Sossusvlei. It's got these incredible contrasts. If you look at some of these images, I'm going to flip through them now. This absolutely brilliant red ochre sand that contrasts with these open, fantastic skies and all of these dunes that one can explore. Now, a lot of these dunes have a height of around 700 plus feet. The biggest one that you can see guys climbing here, called Big Daddy, is over 1,200 feet in size, and this is part of the experience that we take guests on. It's nice to get in early to the reserve, early to this actual place, which is known as Dead Flay, where the dunes meet this salt pan devoid of any wildlife in the middle of the salt pan and form these incredible contrasts. But when you look at these images, you might think to yourself, geez, there can't be much interesting living in this area. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of stuff going on, but there certainly is. If you scratch the surface of Sossusvlei, you can find things like this weird character. This is a web-footed gecko. It has a translucent skin, and as you can see, he has no eyelids. But what he does have is a depression at the top of his eye that enables him to catch that little bit of morning fog that comes in off the Atlantic coast, and it catches those water droplets which then run down the surface of his eye. And he's able to lick his eyeball at the same time cleaning it of many of the little sand molecules, fine sand in this area, and also getting that water source that he needs. How about this guy? These are fantastic animals, the sand-snotted lizard. These are incredible lizards that stand on this hot dunes and they alternate their feet as the morning temperature heats up on the dunes, and as you can see by the shovel-faced structure, they're able to bury themselves under sand incredibly quickly. You also get a wonderful, beautiful spider. Now, most of you are probably averse to spiders, but wait until I tell you a little bit more about this beautiful lady, who's actually known as the dancing white lady, or in some areas the Cinderella Spider. They live on the dunes, and they are continually in an ongoing battle between them and a wasp known as a pompilid wasp. Now, the wasp looks to hunt the spider down by capturing them, stinging the spider, paralyzing it, and burying the spider in a burrow and laying its egg on the spider, which then hatches as a larva and eats the spider that is essentially paralyzed and buried alive. But it's not all doom and gloom for the spiders. The dancing white ladies have a nifty trick up their sleeve. They're often found at the top of a sand dune, and they're able to roll their feet up into a ball and then roll away from the wasps who are out to hunt them. And they roll down these sand dunes at about 50 odd rotations per second, and there's no way the wasp is ever able to keep up or catch them. So there's wonderful little ecologies that have developed in this area with ongoing battles on a daily basis that our guides bring to life for any of the guests traveling in this area. Another one that's maybe not everyone's favorite snakes, but this is an interesting one. The Perengi's adder, otherwise known as the Sidewinding Snake. They have an incredible ability to traverse over the surface of these sand dunes. And at any given time, there's only two parts of their body that are touching these dunes. Now remember, Namibia is a desert biome, so during the day, it can heat up quite nicely. If you're talking about the months of October, November, December, it can get up to 100 Fahrenheit in the middle of the heat of the day, cooling off quite a bit in the evening. Of course, in our winter, the opposite of your summer, if we're talking June, July, August, at night time those temperatures can drop quite substantially, even down to 55 odd Fahrenheit. But in the middle of the day, that heat will be up in the region of 80 odd Fahrenheit. So despite winter or summer, it can be really warm in the middle of the heat of the day. Perfect then that when you're traveling over this, you're not throwing your whole body across that hot sand dunes. Only two parts of your body touching at any given time. These sidewinding snake or Perengi's adders, which are very, very lightly venomous, they are of no danger to humans, have another great adaptation. They hunt those shovel-snouted lizards as well as the web-footed geckos. And to do this, they bury themselves in the sand. And as you can see from this image here, their eyes are located almost on the top of their head, which enables them to submerge their entire body in the sand, and then they wait for these lizards and geckos to run past. Now, the Camp Little Kilala is located inside what is known as the Kilala Wilderness Reserve, which as you can see is a private reserve, almost 70,000 acres, half of it within the Namib National Park. Now this is important when we talk about the location of Little Kilala Lodge, because it's the closest camp to the private gate entrance for the visit to those beautiful sand dunes of Sossusvlei. So that means wilderness safaris and natural habitat guests are first in line to get into those dunes, get those beautiful photographic shots as the sun comes in, those amazing contrasts of the red sand dunes and the blue skies, which is an important point when we talk about private access into that nature reserve. There's a lot of great features at Little Kilala. I'm going to start with some of the more interesting ones. How about a romantic dining experience in the wine cellar? Now, it's not just as straightforward as enjoying some of South Africa's best wines, but if you look closely, you'll see that the floor to this wine cellar, the sunken wine cellar, is actually just the desert sand. So imagine for a moment enjoying a fantastic 20-year-old Meerlust Rubicon wine, Merlot, from the vineyards of the Cape, while sinking your toes into a desert that is over 200 million years old. That's quite a thought, and it gets even more imaginative depending on how much wine you decide to drink. Well, how about in the evenings heading out to look for these guys, scorpions. Now, scorpions are highly interesting, especially in this area. There's a huge variety of them. Again, none of them that are overly venomous, but they're fluorescent. It's a chemical that they produce under their exoskeleton that causes this fluorescence. So we head out at night with a black light, You learn all about the varied world of these scorpions. So you can see in the southern part of Namibia, we're bringing to life a lot of interesting smaller species and how they have functionally evolved to adapt in this kind of desert biome. Like we mentioned earlier, the stargazing in Namibia is second to none. Bathed under a sea of southern hemisphere constellations, where you get to learn all about the varied constellations in the southern hemisphere, quite different from North America. A very interesting experience indeed. Now the Camp Little Kilala, you've got fantastically sized rooms. Your average room size is around 850 square feet in size. There's extensive use of lovely neutral colors and gorgeous textures in the room, as you can see there. You've even got your private plunge pool outside your room and this glass paneling that allows you virtually almost a 360-degree view over these incredible landscapes. But if that's not enough for you, how about sleeping on a rooftop, a star bed, where we do your bedroom turn down on the actual roof of your room if you so wish. Now, on the Kilala Reserve, there's a huge amount of activities and some varied wildlife in this area. It's got incredible amounts of habitats that combine from acacia-lined grassy plains to more rugged mountains. And these can be experienced either through hot air ballooning over the reserve down towards the dunes. And you get these kind of images that unfold as you hot air ballooning over the area, seeing something known as fairy circles, these strange depressions in the surface, which is probably caused by old termite mounds, but there's no set theory yet on how these actual fairy circles came about. But the landscapes and the views on this private reserve are quite spectacular, and there's a number of different ways that we travel around the reserve to experience them, whether it's a morning breakfast up on a hilltop overlooking the reserve, maybe it might be a sundowner drink as the sun sets, and you're getting to see all varied number of animals on the reserve, from ostrich to springbuck to oryx to bat-eared foxes, brown-eyed hyenas, even black-backed jackals. How about traversing the reserve on our quad bikes, otherwise known as ATVs? Now that's a great way to get across the reserve. All including various different types of activities, whether it's activities back at camp or heading out maybe for a picnic after a morning visiting the Sossusvlei dunes. So a huge variety of activities and experiences to be had at Sossusvlei, and it's a great introduction to a journey through Namibia. But as we leave the area of Sossusvlei, we're going to start to head out, and we head out over the sand dunes. We fly low over the actual coastline, and we head far north into the area known as Karaka Fault. Now the Karaka Fault in northwest Namibia has got to be one of the harshest environments on the planet, but it's got endless vistas of stark plains and ancient valleys, beautiful rugged peaks, and they all end along the desolate shores of the skeleton coastline. This is the area divided amongst three different camps. The camp we're going to look at is right in the middle there, known as Desert Rhino Camp, that is on the edge of the Untitled River, which again is an ephemeral underground river source. And it's not all deserts all the time. Imagine after the advent of summer rains, which tend to come in late December, early January. It's not a lot of rain, but even that tiny bit of water can result in these kind of vistas. Incredible vegetation that fringes the courses of these ephemeral rivers, and it's this kind of vegetation that sustains a very diverse array of quite superbly adapted desert wildlife in this area. And there's a reason behind the name Desert Rhino Camp, which we'll get to in some detail now. What I love about Namibia is a country that has solved the riddle of conservancies. So conservancies are essentially conservation areas that have developed by providing a platform to sustain and provide a livelihood to the communities that live in and around these areas. So remember I said 2 million people in a country roughly twice the size of the state of California. That's not a lot of people, but there certainly are rural communities in and around these areas where free roaming wildlife occurs. And what Wilderness Safaris has done is we've engaged with a number of communities where we've built a camp, we've built an experience around the camp, but the staff and the communities, rural communities in that area, benefit directly from it. They get training and skills to work in the camp. And in many cases, a lot of our camps, over a number of years, the process of 10 to 20 odd years, built these camps, We've built up a certain capital base. The staff that have worked in those camps have built up a capital base themselves, and they've actually purchased a part of the property. So many of the camps that we run and own, we are majority owners, but the local communities are part owners in the product too. In some cases, up to 49% ownership in the camp. That's a fantastic model that engages the local community, where they directly are impacted and feel the benefit of having tourism, ecotourism focused projects. And Desert Rhino Camp is a wonderful story of a community benefit combined together with some incredible cultural heritage, the Sand Bushmen, nomadic tribes that traversed this area thousands of years ago, and combining together with an incredible wildlife experience that showcases some of the most diverse animals and plants in the area. This image you're seeing right now might appear quite benign. It looks like a half-alive bush in the middle of the desert, but it's an incredible tree known as a welwitschia. And the leaves of the tree are actually only 2 solid leaves that grow out from either side of the center stem. Most of the tree is underground. And I can tell by the length of these leaves that this tree is roughly 160 years old. So just these amazing stories that come to life. And it's not only about the fauna and the flora, but it's also about the experiences that one has in this area. These zebra, again, might look like quite ordinary zebra, incredibly well adapted, known as Hartmann's mountain zebras. They've adapted to this really harsh environment. They've got a special hoof structure that allows them to travel over this rocky environment. But you'll see a lot of other more commonplace game in this area. You might be seeing giraffe. If one is lucky, you'll be seeing even spotted hyena in between these euphorbia plants that you can see in the background. And certainly one of Namibia's greatest success stories, a desert adapted lion, free roaming lion that move in this area between communities, and there's a whole lot of interesting occurrences that happen when one talks about free roaming lion and the presence of local communities. But this is all in and around one of my absolute favorite camps, known as Desert Rhino Camp. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's real specifics behind the name. But to get into the detail of the camp, it's 8 beautifully comfortable Meru-style tents. Quite rustic in its design, but it certainly suits the environment. There's a plunge pool, a beautiful dining and living area, and from here you've got these incredible views. And here we set up dining at night in the middle of the valley or back in the public area of the camp. But the rooms, as you can see, are really tastefully designed. They're simple structures able to withstand the harsh environment here, but also provide you guys with the maximum amount of comfort, as you can see in the images here. But the real success story behind Desert Rhino Camp has to be about these guys. And it is the world's most unique population of rhino. Now, these are a subspecies of black rhino, a desert-adapted black rhino. For those of you who are interested, scientific name Dicerus bicorus, a subspecies of the original black rhino. And they're the only free-roaming rhino anywhere in Africa. Now, we all know how under threat rhino are these days from poaching. Imagine this, that the single rhino has not been poached here in over 11 years. Now, how can that be? Well, it's because wilderness safaris have engaged with a non-profit known as Save the Rhino Trust. And what has essentially happened is people that previously might have been considered poachers have now been converted into trackers, and an entire tracking experience of these black rhino has been built into this camp experience. And now the local communities derive a direct benefit from protecting and conserving these rhino. And it's a wonderful experience to go out with these trackers, many of them former poachers turned trackers, to learn about this conservation project and, quite frankly, to track black rhino on foot. So we drive out in the mornings, we know where the rhino generally are, we have guides who position them, or at least record their position every evening prior to heading out on the morning game drive, and then it's off the Land Rover and tracking them, obviously, hopefully downwind. And it's an incredible experience to get this close to these incredible animals that are under so much threat. But here you get to see a real conservation success story in practice. Right, from Desert Rhinocam, we're going to head along the itinerary further to the northeast to an area known as Etosha. Now, Etosha is the result of a massive geological shift that dramatically changed the course of what was known as the Canary River. The Canary River is the actual border between Namibia and Angola. You can see at the top of that map there how that river starts to meander and curve as it gets towards the ocean. Now, Etosha has got its name from the Herero tribe, an interesting local cultural tribe, and in Herero the name means Great White Place. And you can see in the middle of the map there certainly is a Great White Place crammed into the middle of Etosha National Park. And that is the edges, or rather the beginnings of a massive salt pan. And it's at the edges of this pan that it gives way to quite a surprising variety of vegetation types, all manner of vegetation types, from woodland to grasslands. And it's these vegetation types that fringe this massive salt lake that is about roughly 1,900 square miles in size, where you get a huge variety and concentration of large mammal fauna. So that's anything from elephant to lion, all manner of springbuck, wildebeest or canoe, zebra, giraffe, and gemsbok. So this is where the real stereotypical wildlife experience kicks into gear. Now, we take guests with natural habitat to a private concession. It's known as the Ungava private concession, and it's about 75,000 acres in size. And as you can see in this image here, it's partly connected, or at least partly inside Etosha National Park. So natural habitat guests have the ability to both travel within the national park or remain on their private concession. And that's an important differentiator there. Private concessions are only for use of the guests who are staying at camps within that concession. National parks are for public access. So you will find many other travelers self-driving or other tour companies taking guests through those areas. But a private concession is a lot more exclusive, as you can see here. Now, this concession has a huge amount of wildlife on it. It's the largest private concession on Etosha's boundary, and it's got a great combination of Mopani woodland and also some of that scrub thorn and open grassy plains, as you can see here. So you get a huge variety of species, not only from wildebeest, but you'll get oryx and springbuck and zebra and black-backed jackal and all other manner of species congregating around the few waterholes in the reserve as well as inside Etosha National Park. Now, what I find really interesting is these kind of contrasts, the spectacular desert background, you know, the Mopani bushveld in the distance there, and a waterhole. And here you can see there's a couple of two bulls that are drinking at the waterhole, Impala a little bit away, and there you can see a herd led by their matriarch female rushing down out of the Mopani to get access to the waterhole. So you can imagine how these waterholes is the center of attention. All the action happens in and around these waterholes, whether it's animals coming to drink or predators setting up for their ambush. It's the waterholes in this area that draw all of the attention. Ungava Game Reserve, just like Desert Rhinocam, also is a wonderful success story when we talk about rhino. It's got the highest number of rhino anywhere in Namibia concentrated in one singular area, and it's one of the better areas to see both black and white rhino together. You can see these are white rhino in the image. A couple of things that tell us that. First of all, they're in a group. Black rhino are generally solitary. They've got a flat-shaped lip, which enables them to graze. They are grazers, eating grass. And you can see also by the structure of their head and the shape of their back that there's a pronounced bump above their shoulders, which indicates that they're also white rhino. In contrast to that, you also get a lot of black rhino in this area. Now, here's a great example of the difference. You can see how the black rhino, his lip is hook-shaped, enabling him to browse or pull the leaves away from the branches. He is also predominantly solitary. Another great experience on the Ungava Reserve has to be the lion in this area. There's the highest densities of lion anywhere in Namibia are inside Etosha, with Ungava Reserve actually recording the highest densities of lion in any given area. And it's all got to do, again, with these waterholes. And many of the waterholes are man-made, or at least they are managed by man. And that encourages and enables us to sustain the wildlife in this area. Some unique species, again, black-faced impala, a unique endemic species to Namibia. Quite a large number of plains game in the area, as I mentioned previously, red hartebeest like these guys here, zebra, mountain zebra, eland, black-faced impala, giraffe, oryx. Oryx are incredibly well adapted animal to this desert environment too, and that's something our guides bring to life as one travels through this area. Etosha and Ungava is one of the few reserves where I would actually encourage guests to, in the evening, not even worry too much about heading out on game drive. Spend your time at the waterholes. Ungava itself has some brilliantly floodlit waterholes, and it's here that one can spend the whole evening watching and waiting as all manner of animals come down to the waterhole to drink. And it can get quite intense in the evenings here as various different animals converge on that area, whether it's lion or even rhino, maybe elephant, brown hyena coming into that area. And everyone's trying to get their little piece of the pie, and you get some interesting interactions occurring in and around this waterhole. We actually do have some blinds or hides built quite close to the various waterholes, so one's able to sit there quietly and get really up close and personal with the animals coming down to those waterholes. One of my absolute favorites has to be walking in the reserve. Walking in Ungava is incredible, and a lot of the walking is done in and around where the rhino are located. Again, you get to walk on desert-adapted black rhino at Desert Rhinocam, and here at Ungava, what a contrast to walk in this kind of environment and get up close and personal with white rhino, for example. And here you just see that incredible contrast of the environments. This is clearly an image that has been taken post the arrival of our summer rains, maybe in January or February. You can see how that entire stark area just springs to life with the advent of any form of rain. Now, the camp that we're including on the Natural Habitat Program is called Ungava Tented Camp. I love the fact that we're using a tented camp here. Again, it brings to life that Meru-style experience. What's really spectacular about this camp is everything is at ground level. It's not an elevated camp in any way or form. And there's a very, very productive waterhole right in front of camp. And like I said earlier, it's the waterholes that generate all the interest, and this is where you want to be spending your day, whether it's the heat of the day, in the swimming pool, looking at the waterhole, maybe sitting on the deck as you can see here. But it's a fantastic little camp that provides incredible facilities. It's only 8 tents, so nice and small and intimate, as you can see in that image there. Right, I wanted to, before we start to move towards the question part of the webinar, I wanted to touch on 2 other areas that for me are really important and spectacular. The one is along the Skeleton Coast. The camp is known as Horeb Skeleton Coast. It's a relative newcomer to the wilderness portfolio. We built the camp just over 2 years ago. And then right on the far north of Namibia, you can see a camp listed there, Karaka Fault, which is right on the border between Namibia and Angola, which has to be one of the most desolate areas in southern Africa. So let's have a quick look at Horeb Skeleton Coast Camp and what makes this area so special. Again, it's an area of just incredible contrast. I mean, imagine seeing pictures like this of these kind of oryx moving down sand dunes between this striated rock formations. And certainly Horeb Skeleton Coast brings this whole story to life. It also brings to life a lot of stories around the hostility of the environment along this coastline, littered with shipwrecks and whale skeletons. And this is a very, very remote part of the Karaka Fault. It's certainly a land of mountains and plains that meet fascinating beaches along the Atlantic coastline. The camp is actually built on a transient river known as the Horeb River, and it is built set inland from the actual coastline, about 26 miles inland from the coastline. There's 5 different diverse habitats that one traverses as you travel from the camp down to the actual coastline. And that is done by driving down to the coastline, which takes about 4.5 to 5 hours, then spending time on the actual coast, seeing the massive seal colonies, the shipwrecks, learning about the stories of the shipwrecks here, enjoying a lunch, maybe a dip in the Atlantic Ocean, and then you jump into a caravan and fly 15 minutes back over those 4 or 5 different habitats as you're coming down onto that beach system. So it's a great way to experience it as you drive through it, and then conversely as you fly back over it. And as we drive down, we actually hug the flow of this transient river system known as the Horeb. And as you can see, there is a lot of vegetation in and around the river system. In the background there you can see some trees and shrubs growing along that river system. So there is a water source underneath, and it's a lot of animals that have learned to access this water source, and specifically to find some of these incredible oases that pop up in the middle of this desert environment as we follow the Horeb River down to the Skeleton Coast. And there is a huge amount of animals in and around this area. This is just such a great image coming up here of this lone elephant bull as he walks down the middle of the Horeb River system, feeding as he goes along some what looks like mustard bushes to the bottom left of your image there. And there you can see in the bottom right of the image a guy who's been standing up on the hilltop taking pictures of this bull elephant. So there is some really incredible desert adapted species in this area. And when you learn about an animal like a desert adapted elephant, it's in complete contrast to elephants in other parts of Africa. They have longer legs, they've got a wider shaped foot space, which allows them to travel over the soft sand. It allows them to cover soft sand more easily, longer legs and a wider surface area on their feet. You'll see their behavior is quite different. They don't tend to rip down tree branches and destroy the entire tree, push it over, take off a branch, and then they'll carefully pluck every single leaf from that branch because they know that it's a restricted or limited food resource for them. So just amazing to learn about their behavioral adaptations. And from the river systems of Horeb, it's down to the coastlines to some of the largest Cape fur seal colonies, and here you learn about the different whale populations that traverse this coastline, the fur seals, the brown hyenas that hunt these seals at night. So just amazing desert adapted wildlife to this area. If one is really lucky, you might get to see the desert adapted lion that occur quite frequently in this area. Those of you will know that sadly 3 of these lions were poisoned quite recently and passed away. Those are lions that were part of a research program managed by this chap called Dr. Flip Stander, who's actually based at Horeb Skeleton Coast Camp. So whether he's in camp or one of his assistants like MZ, we encourage Flip and MZ to talk about it. They have a great presentation that they'll show guests when they're in camp, tell the story of the desert lions. And for those of you who are really interested, I urge you to get a hold of a recent movie called Vanishing Kings, made by Willem and Leanne Steenkamp, and they follow the story of Dr. Flip Stander over more than a decade as he brings to life the story of the 5 musketeers, these young cubs, and how they grew up, and sadly how 3 of them have recently been poisoned. And there's that whole story again coming to light of human-wildlife conflict, free-roaming animals in Namibia meeting rural communities in these areas. The camp's a fantastically built camp. It's got this lovely stretch tent type structure, completely new design as you can see here. But it's really about these incredible images, this amazing desert adapted wildlife, and how it manages to survive in this kind of environment. If we head from Skeleton Coast, we're going to go even further north, right onto the border of Namibia and Angola. This is the perennial river known as the Canary River, and this has got to be one of the most remote places on the planet. Actually, for those of you who are familiar with Microsoft's Paul Allen, he comes out to this camp Serra-Kafeme every year to go off-grid for a week. And this camp is just an amazing camp that's set among some shady trees on the banks of the Canary River, which is this perennial river system. And it's, like I said, it's got to be one of the most remote camps in southern Africa. Its actual name, which is Portuguese, originates from the mountains in this area that dominate this whole northern skyline, as you can see here. And it's just this area where the silence is absolutely deafening. And guests will fall asleep to the sound of just quiet trickle of rushing water in this completely hostile, absolutely majestic environment, as you can see here. And here's just a great image of how this perennial river, the Canary, provides a lifeblood as it cuts through one of the driest deserts in the world. And there's a huge amount of varied activities, a lot of them focused in and around the river system, whether it's boating, walking, game drives. We've got incredible eco-sensitive quad biking excursions again. One of the highlights of this area is interacting with the Himba tribes. The Himba tribes are an amazing nomadic tribe that occur in this area. They've completely shunned the industrial and technological revolution. I sometimes envy them for the fact they don't know what email is, but they live in this incredible hostile environment and move nomadically with their cattle or goats between various areas. You can see in the background there, they're busy deconstructing one of their mobile tents that are covered in with the hides of their cattle that form their tent structures. And we have guides that speak fluent Himba, and they'll interact with the Himba tribes, and we get to learn all about this culture and this incredible nomadic culture. They're actually not Bantu tribes. They're not of southern African origin. You can see by their features some beautiful people that have actually come down over thousands of years. They've migrated through the Great Rift Valley that has essentially spat them out in this tiny corner of Namibia. So they are East African in origin, and they've migrated through the Great Rift Valley, being trapped and left in this area, and decided to follow this nomadic lifestyle. An amazing experience for any guest that want to have a truly, truly authentic experience. The camp itself is a beautifully designed camp. It's 8 unique canvas and thatch chalets, each with its own ensuite bathroom, elevated decks looking out over the wooden system there. There's a lovely dining room and pool deck lookout, which looks all the way down the actual Canary River system, as you can see there. But I wanted to end off by saying, you know, Namibia, as you go through these contrasting images, and as the title to the slideshow said, it was once named the land that God made in anger, because it's just such dramatic scenery that one sees. But it's again not a country made in anger. It has some of the most beautiful experiences with some of the most incredibly adapted wildlife. And it's really a land that combines the beauties of a culture that meets some of Africa's most positive conservation efforts. So I'd urge you guys to consider traveling to Namibia. Thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions, please fire away. Questions on climate, the Namibian dollar, anything you'd like to know, please fire away. We'll take your questions over the next few minutes. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you so much, Craig. We've got a lot of great questions here, so I'm going to just jump right in. The number one question today, what is the best time of year to visit Namibia?
Great question. So there's two contrasting experiences when you consider time of year to visit Namibia. Now remember, it's a country that has very little rainfall. So the difference in terms of your seasonality in terms of rainfall is quite irrelevant. However, the experience on the ground can be quite different. From about May to September, it's our winter period. It's a very dry period. The dunes in the South Sossusvlei don't get much rain anyway through the summer, so that doesn't vary as much. But the rest of the country is at a very dry period. So the background image, the landscapes can be quite hostile and dramatic in their scenery. However, once the summer rain starts to arrive, and like I mentioned, that's a very small amount of rain, it starts to arrive in late December through to March. You could see in some of those images, especially in Etosha, how the entire landscape changed, and it went from this dramatic brown color that you can see here to a bright, bright green. So your photographic opportunities are better from late December to early March. You also get a lot of your summer migrants, all those summer migrant birds, breeding plumage, baby animals. However, from May to October, your animals are going to be concentrated in and around the water sources. So you're probably going to get more dramatic wildlife interactions because everything is heading for a very limited resource, which is that water. So it's two very contrasting experiences. When you talk about temperature too, that also differs massively. From May through to October, the middle of our winter season in southern Africa, your daytime temperatures are probably reaching a high of around 85 odd Fahrenheit, but your nighttime temperatures can drop quite dramatically being a desert environment. They can go all the way down to 50 odd Fahrenheit. Whereas from October on through summer, especially October and November, which are two of your warmest months, Your daytime temperature can be easily in excess of 100 Fahrenheit, your midday high. Your nighttime temperature probably only drops to around 80 odd Fahrenheit, so it's a more consistently hot time of year. Good question, two very different answers.
Yes, yes, that's true. Thank you so much. So with the free roaming wildlife, how do groups hike in Namibia?
Okay, great. So remember, free roaming wildlife in a massive country, so I imagine part of your question is relating to how do you get to this wildlife? Well, that's the crux with having such great guides as Wilderness Safaris does. There's a lot of telltale signs when you're out driving or hiking looking for wildlife. Predominantly in this kind of sand-based environment, tracking is the most common way to find wildlife. Remember also that water sources are a very rare resource and there's not many of them. So the guides know where all the water sources are, where all the oases, where all the ephemeral rivers, where all the water holes are. So it's relatively easy to track animals to and from those water sources. In terms of groups and hiking, we generally try to split groups into less than seven or less people when going on a walk. It's just easier for the guides to actually manage a group of 7 or less in that size. And then in terms of approach, when it comes to black rhino at Desert Rhinocam or white rhino in Etosha, we always approach downwind. We'll generally approach up to within 700 to 1,000 odd feet of the animal, not much closer, and the vehicle's always nearby.
Okay, thank you. So what about visas? Are visas needed?
No, Namibia is actually really easygoing when it comes to visa requirements. There's only a few countries that require visas. Most of those are in Asia, so you guys wouldn't have to worry about visas. You're allowed to travel in Namibia for up to 90 days without the need for purchasing a visa.
Okay. And another popular question is about inoculations and whether those are required.
There's no inoculations required, no yellow fever certification required, no typhoid required, and as we mentioned earlier, malaria is not a concern at all.
Okay. All right. We have a question here. It says, can you drive up Big Daddy in a dune buggy or only hike?
No, we're only able to hike up Big Daddy or Dune 45, any number of the dunes. As you saw in those earlier images, there's a huge variety of smaller species that live in that dune environment, whether it's the Perengis, adders, or the web-footed geckos, and many of them actually submerge themselves under the surface of the sand, and our guides have to look for their tracks and then dig them out to show the guests. So one wouldn't be allowed to drive up there. You're pretty likely to be driving over some pretty sensitive environment.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. So we have several people who are interested in birding, wondering what other type of bird species might be seen.
Okay, that's a great question. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of it all. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Namibia has some of the highest levels of endemism of any country in Africa. So there's a huge amount of birds that are only found in and around that area. So I'm going to fire off some of my absolute Namibian favorites. Burchell's corsa. You've got Benguela long-billed larks. Hartlib's Franklin is a really interesting one. Grey kestrels. Rappel's parrot. Really interesting parrots that you get there. Gray's lark is a very interesting one as well to consider. Or Ripple's Coron, that's an endemic species that many birders will be after. Some of the biggest stuff, some great raptors that you'll find in Namibia. So Verexes or black eagles, giant eagle owls, spotted eagle owl. You know, if you sit at some of the water holes, a lot of these Namakwa sandgrass come down to the water holes and they bury their chest feathers in the water, and they're able to retain droplets of water under their chest feathers, which they then fly off carrying all this heavy load of water to their little chicklets, and their chicklets are able to receive water by drinking it essentially out of their chest feathers. But while these sandgrass are at the water holes filling up on water, You get lanner falcons will often be perched on a windmill or maybe a acacia tree nearby, and they look to attack and hit these sandgrass as they're coming in to get water sources. So again, the water holes is where all the action happens. White-tailed shrike, short-toed rock thrush, cheapers. The Herero chat, a really unique endemic species. We could rattle on birds all night long if we wanted to.
I think there's some people who would be happy to do that too. There's lots of passionate birders listening today. So we have a few questions about the accommodations and the comfort of those. There's a question about mosquito nets. Someone else was wondering if they're air conditioned. So can you tell us a little bit about the comfort of those?
Great, of course. Little Kilala is air conditioned. Desert Rhinocam, Horeb, Ungava is not air conditioned, but there's interesting concept behind the structures. If one looks at one of Skeleton Coast Camp, we've built so most of our camps are 100% solar energy, reverse osmosis water systems. We have an absolute minimal carbon footprint on the environment, on the area. Actually, I challenge you when you go to a wilderness safaris camp to look for concrete. You'll struggle to find any concrete. We almost only use disposable materials. Now, with all of that in mind, air conditioning draws a huge amount of wattage from solar systems. So some of our camps, besides Little Kilala, they don't have air conditioning because of that factor, because we're using solar energy. However, we've got an incredible structure. If you saw one of Skeleton Coast Camp, it's a box-type structure that's elevated. It's built about 10 or so inches on an elevated platform off the ground, and then over the top of that box-type structure to your room is a stretched tent design. Now, the back of the stretched tent is actually open in such a way that it captures any form of wind that comes down that river valley, that ephemeral river valley. And so you've got a continual flow of air over the top and underneath your room that keeps that ambient temperature throughout the day incredibly comfortable, which is a really, really clever design that negates the need for air conditioning at that camp. Mosquito netting, there is mosquito netting in all of the camps. Mosquito netting, although we have it in the camps, there's not often that much use for it. Now remember, mosquitoes tend to prefer an environment where there's a large amount of sitting still water source. Now that's hard to find in Namibia. So the mosquito issues are really, really quite small in comparison to other countries, but yes, there is mosquito netting at all of the camps.
Okay. So how far in advance do people need to think about booking these trips, like the more remote camps and so forth, knowing that they can only handle a few people at a time?
That's a very, very good question, and I'm glad you mentioned it. So for two reasons. The first one you've already mentioned, being that all of our camps are small, they're intimate camps, they encourage a more exclusive experience. So there's not a lot of rooms. Many of the camps vary from 4 to 10 rooms and not more. However, also consider this, that the Namibian dollar, which is the local currency in Namibia, is pinned to the South African rand. So it's the same value as the South African rand, which means you're getting roughly 15 Namibian dollars for every US dollar. Namibia has become one of the cheapest destinations in Southern Africa, which means the popularity to travel here is immense. I would say you have to book definitely no less than 6 months out. You can find accommodation inside of 6 months to travel, but it's going to be tricky. Definitely 6 months to a year out is required to book space in Namibia.
Okay, good. Thank you. We'll just ask a couple more questions and then we will wrap it up. Back to the birding. There's a question that says, are all of the camps on a migration flyway, and do the migration periods differ from the Americas?
So, good question. No, not all of the camps are on a migration flyway, but certainly the one of Skeleton Coast Camp is. Certainly the camps in and around the Tosha area are. So the primary migration starts to occur actually right now. So we start to right now see a lot of those summer migrants coming off the Russian steppe, northern parts of Europe, and they'll be coming down into southern Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, etc. So from about, maybe we're a bit early now because it's early September, I'd say from about mid-late October, definitely November through to January is going to be your primary period to get all of the summer migrants.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I think we will stop there. I want to give you a few minutes to be able to share any closing thoughts. So, Craig, I will turn it back over to you now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, guys, so just to wrap up on that one, Namibia to me is a country of astonishing contrast. It's, like I said earlier, it's certainly celebrated for its incredible landscapes. It should be celebrated for its amazing cultures. It is celebrated for some of the most wonderful conservation efforts. And if you're looking for that unique wildlife experience that really is a safari frontier, then Namibia has to be at the top of that list. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And let's get to see all those birders out here.
And my thanks as well, and we will get the replay out to all of you who have been with us today, and we'll get that to you by way of email. Our hope is to get it to you tomorrow. So this will conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everyone, and Craig, thank you again so much.
You're most welcome. Bye, everyone.